The boardroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows applause. Not the kind that fills a room after a beautiful speech. This was the silence that comes after humiliation, thick, heavy, and suffocating, like smoke after a fire has already burned everything to the ground. Ethan Cole stood at the center of that silence. His jacket was slightly wrinkled. His tie, the one his daughter Maya had helped him pick that morning, tugging at the fabric with her tiny fingers and saying, "You look like a prince, Daddy," was loosened just slightly at the collar. He had $43 in his bank account. He had a 6-year-old waiting for him at home. And he had just been fired in front of every single person he had worked with for the last 4 years. The CEO of Hartwell Industries, a woman named Victoria Hartwell, stood at the head of the table, arms folded, expression carved from ice. She hadn't even looked at him when she said the words. "Your services are no longer required, Mr. Cole. Security will escort you out." And here is what nobody in that room expected. Ethan Cole did not beg. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He straightened his tie, the one Maya had picked up his single folder from the table, and walked out of that boardroom with more dignity than most men carry in a lifetime. But what happened next, nobody expected. To understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand who Ethan Cole was before the boardroom, and who Victoria Hartwell was before she became the kind of woman who fires people without looking at them. Ethan had not always been a man in wrinkled jackets. 3 years ago, he was a rising project director at a mid-sized tech firm in the city, the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. Not because he was loud, because he was certain of himself, certain of his work, certain of the woman he loved. Then Lauren died. A car accident on a Tuesday morning, ordinary and devastating in the way only real tragedies can be. She was 31 years old. Maya was 3. And Ethan, brilliant, composed, certain Ethan, came completely undone. He left his job. He moved to a smaller apartment. He spent 8 months barely leaving the house, learning how to be both mother and father to a little girl who kept asking where Mommy had gone. He told Maya that Mommy was a star now, watching from somewhere warm and high up in the sky. Maya accepted this with the devastating simplicity of a child who trusts completely. Eventually, Ethan rebuilt. Not to who he was before. Grief doesn't allow that. But into something quieter, something more careful. He took a mid-level role at Hartwell Industries. He packed Maya's lunch every morning. He attended every school recital. He kept his head down. He did extraordinary work that nobody seemed to notice. Until someone did notice, for the wrong reasons. Victoria Hartwell, on the other hand, had never come undone. Not once. Not publicly. She had built Hartwell Industries from a struggling startup into a $40 million company by the age of 34, and she had done it by being precise, demanding, and relentlessly focused. She had no patience for sentiment in business. Her philosophy was simple: results first, relationships second, and relationships were almost always optional. People admired her. People feared her. People very rarely understood her. And there was something beneath that polished, untouchable surface that Victoria herself had stopped examining. A loneliness so old and so familiar it had stopped feeling like loneliness at all. It had simply become the texture of her life. She did not think about Ethan Cole after he walked out of her boardroom. She had made her decision based on a report from her director of operations, a man named Richard Holt, who told her that Ethan had been leaking internal project timelines to a competitor. The evidence looked clean. Victoria acted. That was how she operated. What she didn't know was that the evidence had been manufactured. 3 weeks after losing his job, Ethan sat at a coffee shop 2 blocks from his old office, his laptop open, his coffee going cold beside him. He was writing cover letters, 37 of them in 3 weeks, and hearing back from nobody. Maya was at school. He had exactly 4 hours before he needed to pick her up. He was reading a job listing for the 3rd time, not because he wanted the job, but because his eyes had stopped processing words, when someone sat down across from him without asking. He looked up. It was a woman he didn't recognize. Dark hair pulled back sharply. Deep navy blazer. Eyes that assessed everything in a room within 3 seconds of entering it. She was carrying a folder, and she placed it on the table between them before she said a single word. "Ethan Cole," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said slowly. "I'm Diana Reyes. I'm the head of internal compliance at Hartwell Industries." She paused. "I think we need to talk." Ethan looked at the folder, then back at her. I no longer work at Hartwell Industries. I know, Diana said. That's exactly why I'm here. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails. Emails with Ethan's name on them. Emails that appeared to show him forwarding confidential data to an outside address. And beside them, in red ink, were annotations that Diana had made herself, timestamps that didn't align, metadata that had been altered, a forwarding address that had been created just 11 days before the leak was reported. Someone framed you, Diana said quietly. I've been running a quiet audit for 6 weeks. I think it was Richard Holt. I think he was moving project data to a competitor himself and needed someone to take the fall. Ethan stared at the pages for a long time. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply. He almost laughed, not from bitterness, but from the strangeness of hearing something so uncomplicated in the middle of a situation that had felt entirely impossible. Does Victoria Hartwell know? Diana hesitated, just for a half second, but Ethan caught it. Not yet, she said. Dramatic pause. Something shifted in the air between them. Ethan closed the folder slowly and slid it back across the table. Then I want nothing to do with this, he said. Diana blinked. Excuse me. I don't want to go back, he said. I don't want a settlement. I don't want my name cleared in some internal memo that nobody reads, and I definitely don't want to walk back into that building. He stood up, and his voice was very quiet and very steady. Clear it if you want to, but leave me out of it. He picked up his cold coffee, nodded once, and walked out. Diana sat at that table alone for a long time, staring at the folder. Can you imagine how he felt in that moment? Walking away from the one thing that could fix everything, not from defeat, but from a choice so deliberate it looked almost like peace. But the story was only beginning, because Diana Reyes did not leave him out of it. 2 weeks later, Ethan was at Maya's school recital. He was sitting in the third row, slightly overdressed because Maya had again insisted on picking his shirt. This time a soft blue button-up, she said, matched his eyes, and holding a small bouquet of sunflowers because sunflowers were Maya's favorite, and he had learned a long time ago to let his daughter's joy set the agenda for everything else. He was not thinking about Hartwell Industries. He was not thinking about Richard Holt or Diana Reyes or the folder on the coffee shop table. He was watching the small stage at the front of the gymnasium, waiting for the moment his daughter walked out. He did not notice the woman who sat down 2 seats away from him until Maya's class filed onto the stage, and the woman beside him made a soft, almost involuntary sound, like she had forgotten, for just a second, to be composed. Ethan turned. Victoria Hartwell was sitting 2 seats away from him, holding a program, wearing a simple dark coat instead of her boardroom armor, and looking at the stage with an expression he had never seen on her face in the 4 years he'd worked in her building. She looked uncertain. She looked almost soft. He stared at her. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her eyes were on a little girl at the end of the second row on stage, a girl with dark hair and her mother's sharp eyes, who was scanning the audience with barely concealed anxiety. And then, exactly like the morning he had walked out of her boardroom, with his daughter's chosen tie and $43 and every reason to break, Ethan Cole did not react the way anyone would have expected. He didn't stand up. He didn't walk away. He looked at the little girl on stage searching the audience, and then he looked at the sunflowers in his hands, and then, quietly, without thinking too hard about it, he held the bouquet out toward Victoria. She turned. She saw him. The color drained from her face. Mr. Cole, your daughter looks like she's looking for you, he said simply, nodding toward the stage. She'll feel better if you wave. Victoria stared at him for one long, suspended second. Then she turned toward the stage, found her daughter's anxious eyes, and raised her hand in a small wave. The little girl's face broke open into a smile so enormous it seemed to fill the entire gymnasium. Victoria exhaled. Thank you, she said, very quietly. She did not look at him when she said it. Her name? Ethan asked. A pause. Sophie, Victoria said. She's 7. Maya, Ethan said, nodding toward the stage where his own daughter had just appeared, sunflower bright and completely unafraid. 6. They sat in silence for the rest of the recital, 2 parents, side by side, watching their daughters, and the silence was nothing like the one in the boardroom. This silence was different. This silence had something alive inside it. After the recital, walking out, Victoria stopped him with a hand on his arm. I owe you an explanation, she said. You don't, Ethan said. I owe you an apology then. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Did Diana Reyes talk to you? Something moved across Victoria's face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. She did, she said. Yesterday. Ethan nodded slowly. Then you know everything you need to know. He looked toward where Maya was running at him across the gymnasium floor, arms open, absolutely certain of her welcome. He caught her and lifted her, and she buried her face in his neck, and he felt, as he always did in this moment, that he could survive anything. He looked back at Victoria over his daughter's shoulder. I hope Sophie enjoyed the show, he said. And he walked away again. What Ethan didn't know, what nobody had told him yet, was the full shape of what Diana Reyes had uncovered. It wasn't just Richard Holt selling project data to a competitor. That was the surface layer, the part that was easy to document and easy to report. What lay beneath it was older and stranger and more personal. Richard Holt had worked at Hartwell Industries for 9 years. He had been, for 6 of those years, in a quiet and complicated relationship with someone very close to Victoria, her older brother, James Hartwell, who had left the company 3 years ago after a falling out that Victoria had never fully explained to anyone. The competitor receiving the data wasn't a stranger. It was James. James Hartwell had been building a rival company in silence, and Richard had been feeding him information for over a year. And the reason Ethan had been chosen as the fall, the very specific reason, was that Ethan had accidentally uncovered a billing discrepancy 6 months earlier that, if properly investigated, would have led directly to Richard and James. Ethan had flagged it to his supervisor, who was Richard. Richard had buried it. And then, quietly and methodically, he had built a false case against the one employee who had come too close. Diana brought all of this to Victoria in a single meeting that lasted 3 hours. Afterward, Victoria sat alone in her office for a very long time. She thought about James, her brother, who she had loved and fought with and lost, who had apparently decided to burn her company rather than repair their relationship. She thought about Richard, who she had trusted for nearly a decade. She thought about Ethan Cole, walking out of her boardroom with his wrinkled jacket and his quiet dignity and his $43, and she felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. She felt ashamed. But then, and this is the part that changes everything, Diana placed one more document on her desk. A financial analysis. Ethan's project contributions over 4 years, properly attributed. 3 major contracts that he had closed under Richard's name. A proprietary client retention model that Ethan had built from scratch, and that was currently generating 12% of Hartwell's annual revenue. Victoria stared at the numbers. He never said a word, she said, about any of this. He didn't know you didn't know, Diana said quietly. Richard made sure of that. Victoria stood up. She walked to her office window and looked out at the city she had built her company in, stone by stone, sacrifice by sacrifice, and she asked a question she had never asked before in her professional life. What do I owe him? Diana was quiet for a moment. More than you can probably pay, she said honestly. Victoria nodded slowly. And then, because she was Victoria Hartwell and she did not do things in half measures, she picked up her phone. Ethan's phone rang at 8:47 in the evening. Maya was asleep. He was sitting on the floor of the living room, because the couch was covered in a blanket fort Maya had built and he hadn't had the heart to take it down, eating leftover rice from a container and reading a bill he couldn't pay. He answered without checking the name. Hello, Mr. Cole. It's Victoria Hartwell. The silence that followed was different from every other silence in this story. It was thin and electric, like the air before a storm. How did you get this number? He asked. Diana, she said. A pause. I know it's late. I know I have no right to call, but I needed you to hear this directly from me and not from a letter or a legal document. Another pause, and in that pause, for the very first time in Ethan's experience of her, Victoria Hartwell sounded like someone who did not entirely know what to say. I was wrong, she said. About you. About what happened. I made a decision based on information that was specifically designed to deceive me, and I made it without asking you a single question, and I have been trying to find a version of that I can live with, and I can't. Ethan set down his container of rice. Outside, it had started to rain, the kind of rain that comes quickly and without warning, drumming against the windows of small apartments where single fathers sit on living room floors surrounded by their daughters' blanket forts. The kind of rain that makes the whole world feel both very small and very far away at the same time. Mr. Cole, Victoria said. Ethan. The use of his first name, unpracticed and careful, cost her something. He could hear it in her voice. I would like to offer you your position back, with full back pay, a formal title correction reflecting your actual contributions, and a written public acknowledgement from me personally. Richard Holt has been terminated and referred for investigation. My brother, she stopped. Recovered. The situation with my brother is being handled separately. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Say something, she said. And the words came out softer than she intended, raw in a way she had clearly not planned for. And he heard, beneath the composed exterior of the woman who had fired him without looking at him, something he recognized. He recognized the voice of someone who had been holding themselves together for so long they'd forgotten there was another way to be. Why are you doing this tonight? He asked. Why not a letter? Why not through your legal team? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be honest. Because I've been making decisions about people from behind desks and documents for a long time, she said quietly. And I think I wanted to remember how to speak to someone directly. Ethan looked at Maya's blanket fort, at the bill he couldn't pay, at the rain on the window. Can you imagine, he said softly, more to himself than to her, how strange it is to be offered back the thing you stopped wanting. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful. What do you want then? And for a moment, just a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between them, and it was not uncomfortable, and it was not empty, and it was nothing at all like the silence in the boardroom. Ethan went back. Not immediately. Not the next day. He spent a week thinking about it. Honestly, carefully, the way he had learned to think about things after Lauren died, when every decision carried the weight of being the only parent in the equation. He talked to Maya about it, which people might say was absurd because she was 6, but Maya had a way of cutting through complexity that most adults had long since lost. Will you be happy there, Daddy? She asked. He thought about the boardroom. He thought about the coffee shop and Diana's folder. He thought about the school recital and sunflowers and a little girl named Sophie searching a crowd for her mother. He thought about a phone call in the rain. I think so, he said. Eventually. Okay then, Maya said, and went back to her drawing. He accepted the offer on a Thursday morning. The terms were everything Victoria had promised, and then some. His title was Director of Strategic Development, properly reflecting 4 years of work that had been silently credited to someone else. The acknowledgement Victoria published was direct, specific, and unmistakably personal in a way that corporate statements rarely are. People noticed. On his first day back, the office was different. Not because anything physical had changed, same building, same corridors, same view from the mid-floor windows, but because Ethan walked in differently. He wasn't keeping his head down anymore. He didn't need to. Victoria met him in the corridor outside his new office. She was in her full boardroom presence, blazer, composure, the particular quality of attention she brought to everything. But there was something adjusted about her. Something fractionally less armored. Mr. Cole, she said. Ethan, he said. She almost smiled. Ethan. He extended his hand. She shook it. It was formal, and it was genuine, and it contained, in that brief contact, an acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. The wrong done and the wrong admitted, and the long, strange road between a boardroom firing and a rainy phone call and a school recital with sunflowers. How's Sophie? He asked. Something warmed in her expression, not the professional warmth she deployed in meetings, but the real kind, the kind that arrived without being managed. She wants to learn piano, Victoria said. I have absolutely no idea where she got that from. Maya wants a dog, Ethan said. I also have no idea where she got that from, and I'm more concerned about it. Victoria laughed. It was brief and quiet, and she seemed slightly surprised by it herself, as though laughter in a corridor was a thing that required relearning. But it was real, and it landed between them like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive. In the weeks that followed, they worked together. Carefully, professionally, with the particular consciousness of two people who have seen each other outside the roles they were hired to play. There were meetings and project reviews and long evenings where work stretched past office hours, and someone would order food, and they would eat at the conference table surrounded by documents and talk, at first only about work, and then, gradually, about other things. About Sophie's piano lessons. About Maya's campaign for a dog. About what it cost to build something alone, and what it felt like when the thing you built started, unexpectedly, to include someone else. Neither of them named what was happening. Neither of them needed to. Warm tone. On a Friday afternoon in early December, Ethan was packing up his desk when he found it, at the bottom of his bag, forgotten for months. His daughter's chosen tie. The one she had picked on the morning of the boardroom. The one he had straightened before walking out. He held it for a moment. Then he put it in his jacket pocket, close to him, the way you carry the things that have meant something. He turned off his desk lamp. He picked up his bag. He walked out into the corridor where, as it happened, Victoria was walking toward the elevator at the same moment from the opposite direction. They reached it at the same time. She pressed the button. They waited. Maya get her dog? Victoria asked. Not yet, Ethan said. I'm holding out. She's wearing me down. Sophie played her first real scale this week, Victoria said. She called me 6 times to tell me. Ethan smiled. The full version. The one he didn't ration anymore. You answered all 6 times? Obviously, Victoria said, and there was something in her voice so straightforwardly tender that it filled the corridor like light. The elevator arrived. They stepped in together. And as the doors closed, Ethan caught their reflection in the polished metal. A man in a soft blue shirt with a hidden tie in his pocket, and a woman who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to take off her armor. And he thought about the boardroom silence, and the cold coffee, and the rain on the window, and the sunflowers, and a 6-year-old girl who had looked at a complicated situation and said okay, then, and gone back to her drawing. He thought, some things don't arrive the way you plan them. Some things arrive through the wrong door, at the wrong time, wearing the wrong face. And then one day you look up and realize the wrong door was exactly the right one. The elevator descended. Outside, the city moved and breathed and carried on. And somewhere across town, 2 little girls, one practicing piano scales, one drawing pictures of dogs, were each, in their own way, already writing the next chapter. The end always looks different than the beginning. That's how you know it's real.